9 Plus. Down.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now get you the latest from Israel. In a major development that could have wide-ranging ramifications for the country, Israeli lawmakers today approved a key portion of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's extremely controversial and polarizing plan to reshape the country's justice system, despite massive protests that have exposed unprecedented fissures in the country. The vote came after a stormy session in the Knesset, or the Israeli parliament, in which opposition lawmakers chanted shame and then stormed out of the chamber. The vote reflected the determination of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his far-right allies to move ahead with the plan which has tested the delicate social ties that bind Israel, rattled the cohesion of its powerful military, and repeatedly drawn concern from its closest ally, the United States. Now, in today's vote, lawmakers approved a measure that prevents judges from striking down government decisions on the basis that they are unreasonable. Supporters of the legislation say the current reasonability standard gives unelected judges excessive powers over decision-making by elected officials. But critics of this move say this legislation removes a key element of the court's oversight powers and opens the way for corruption and improper appointments. With the opposition out of the hall, the Knesset further ratcheting up the pressure on Netanyahu, thousands of military reservists have declared their refusal to serve under a government that is taking steps that they see as setting the country on a path to dictatorship. Those moves have prompted fears that the military's preparedness could be compromised. These are dangerous cracks, said the military chief, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, in a letter written to soldiers on Sunday, where he added, if we are not going to be a strong and cohesive military, then it's best that we do not serve in the IDF. We will no longer be able to exist as a country in the region. Ahead of Monday's vote, opposition leader Yair Lapid declared, we are headed for complete disaster. Now, this vote came only hours after Netanyahu was released from hospital, where he had a pacemaker implanted. His sudden hospitalization added another twist to an already dramatic series of events. The Biden administration in the United States has frequently spoken out against Netanyahu's government and its overhaul plan. In a statement on Sunday, President Joe Biden warned against pushing ahead with the legal changes that was sparking so much division in Israel. He said, given the range of threats and challenges confronting Israel right now, it doesn't make sense for Israeli leaders to rush this. The focus should be on pulling people together and finding a consensus. Biden has also been critical of the government's steps to deepen Israel's occupation of the West Bank. Now, critics say this new controversial law would be a major stain on Israel's claim to be a liberal democracy. The overhaul calls for sweeping changes that are aimed at curbing the powers of the judiciary, from limiting the Supreme Court's ability to challenge parliamentary decisions to changing the way judges are selected. Netanyahu and his allies say the changes are needed to curb the powers of unelected judges. Protesters, who come from a wide swath of Israeli society, see this overhaul as a power grab, fueled by personal and political grievances of Netanyahu, who is in fact on trial for corruption charges. As lawmakers debated, tens of thousands of people gathered for mass rallies, both for and against this legislation. Some said the state of Israel stands before destruction and ruin that is being brought upon it by a gang of extremists and crooks. Netanyahu's supporters, meanwhile, thronged central Tel Aviv, normally the setting for anti-government protests. Despite the attempts to project business as usual, Netanyahu's schedule was disrupted by his hospitalization, with a cabinet meeting and several trips postponed. His doctor said on Sunday that the procedure had gone smoothly. The Prime Minister said in a short video statement from the hospital that he felt fine. Netanyahu had paused this judicial overhaul in March this year after intense pressure from protesters and labor strikes that halted outgoing flights and shut down parts of the Israeli economy. After talks to find a compromise failed last month, Netanyahu said his government was pressing ahead with this overhaul. Critics of the legislation argue that it will significantly diminish the powers of the Supreme Court and grant the ruling coalition excessive influence in appointing judges and even overruling unfavorable verdicts from the court. The law aims to take away the Supreme Court's power to strike down Israel's basic laws, which function as the country's constitution. This power to review the legality of laws is similar to the power of judicial review, which is vested with the Indian courts. The law also allows the government to choose judges by altering the composition of a collegium-like 9-member committee that selects judges. The government's aim is to reduce the influence of legal professionals and give elected representatives and appointees of the government an automatic majority. Now, why do critics say that these so-called reforms are downright dangerous? 1. The power of the Supreme Court to review or throw out laws would be weakened with a simple majority of just 1 in the Knesset. That means the government would be able to overrule any court decision that is unpalatable to it. 2. The government would have a decisive say over who becomes a judge, including in the Supreme Court, by increasing its representation on the committee which appoints judges. Ministers would not be required to obey the advice of their legal advisors, guided by the Attorney General, something that they currently have to do by law. One controversial reform had already been passed into law earlier. This removed the power of the Attorney General to pronounce a sitting Prime Minister unfit for office. There has been widespread speculation in Israel that the Attorney General was preparing to do exactly that with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu due to a conflict of interest between these reforms and the Prime Minister's ongoing trial for alleged corruption. Critics also fear that Netanyahu wants to leverage this judicial push to freeze or cancel his own trial, an accusation that he denies. Then there are other critical factors. The ruling coalition in Israel views the judiciary as a left-leaning obstacle to its legislative agenda. Netanyahu's government has claimed that Israelis have lost faith in the legal system and that his reform plans would restore power to elected representatives instead of interventionist and unelected judges. Reports say the government seeks to use this power to override the Supreme Court to get rid of rulings that outlaw Israeli outposts on private Palestinian land, for instance, and curtail social reforms, including those impacting the LGBTQA community. Critics argue that these judicial reforms will give the legislature unbridled powers and make it immune from any system of checks and balances. And while this controversial bill is now as good as a law, one thing is clear: the debate will continue, and so will the protests. Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow for the latest news updates from around the globe. Thanks for watching and good night.
Pakistan is actually genociding Baloch people. So being Baloch is a crime. If you are a Baloch, it means in the eyes of Pakistan, you don't have any right to live.
The Chinese and Pakistanis are colonizing the Baloch and exploiting their resources.
The Baloch armed struggle will continue unless China will draw from Pakistan.